Let's finger fucking good. Hi, folks. I'm the Extra Crispy Colonel, and my Extra Crispy $5 filet is now 100% meat. Sorry about that little sponsorship moment there. KFC, they do chicken right. And not just in a bucket either, and by that I mean they do chicken in a vulgar way. That's disgusting. I'd like to take this moment to mention that I'm in no way getting sponsored for this. Don't worry, you know the drill. My name is Bucky, Buck Neal. I was a famous war hero during the Olive Oil War. Fast food agent Jonathan McGuire was meant to be recounting the downfall of KFC, but he's got a bad case of ass flu, which he obtained after eating a spoiled bacon double cheeseburger from Jack in the Box. The less said about that place, the better, I say. In any case, if you don't know, I work as the official mascot and spokesperson for the Rough Riders chicken brand. It's basically an arcade where you can eat chips and con old men out of their hard-earned millions by using a broom to sweep up the rewards. Times are changing. However, as a young man, I truly wanted to be Colonel Sanders, mainly due to the fact that Rough Riders was nothing more than a, shall we say, cheap cash-in on KFC. Don't believe me? Well, if you were to zoom in on the Rough Riders sign by 100,000,000%, you would see a tiny picture of Colonel Sanders' local washing machine dealer. Rough Riders was actually founded out of jealousy for KFC by a man named Jules Faddle. According to Faddle, he had helped Colonel Sanders with making the iconic gravy that KFC is so famous for. Of course, if you're Italian, gravy means tomato sauce, but whatever. We'll talk more about that damn gravy later on in the doc. Mr. Faddle claims to have grown up with Colonel Sanders, and that the pair both served a 6-year stint at Hartman Federal Penitentiary for the illegal distribution of federal rational stamps. You see, back in the 1920s, times were rough, and all fast food companies had their rations at an all-time low. There weren't as many fast food restaurants back then as there are now. Back then, there was only like 2 places open in the whole United States, known as Quan 2 and Quan 2. Ever been to these 2 places? Come on down to Red Barn. Order yourself a barn buster and keep the glass. They were closed in 1931 for killing a governor. I mean, how could that be anything other than a political statement? The ration stamps were unveiled by the federal government in an attempt to ensure that fast food was doled out slowly and surely. When the feds caught wind that Colonel Sanders and Jules were selling stamps, they were thrown into the slammer. After Jules passed away in 1968 from a mishap involving a Henry Hoover, his pet Black Widow Spider revealed in a press conference in Acapulco that Jules had made the entire story up. That he and Colonel Sanders had only met once at a Kentucky-style cook-off in New Bordeaux. Colonel Sanders wasn't very nice and rolled his eyes when Jules went on and on about how Sanders' chicken had changed his life. Colonel Sanders created the original KFC recipes without any help from Jules Faddle. However, a lot of people don't quite know the sick origins of how the original recipes came to be. Get ready, because this is about to get hairy, going to be quite the emotional roller coaster of love. In 1930, during the midst of the Great Depression, Colonel Sanders was feeling very sad. There wasn't any fast food places open in Kentucky. He wanted there to be a place where you could eat French fries and a big fat greasy burger in peace. Over the course of the 1920s, Colonel Sanders had debated again and again on opening up his own restaurant. He already had loads of recipes, and he was sure they'd become a hit with the locals. The only problem was Mr. Sanders barely had any money, so to combat this issue, he decided to take out a loan from Don Ennio Salieri of the Salieri crime family. Italian last name, you know what this is going. Yes, Salieri has seriously been alive since 1930, and yet he's still alive. And well, despite being 58 years old at the time of his encounter with Colonel Sanders, this is because Miss... Ugh. Oh, gosh. Oh gosh. Oh gosh, just the thought of Italians. Alright, I'm good. This is because Mr. Salieri is actually immortal and once accidentally bathed in the fountain of eternal eternalness, mistaking it for being a bath of cinnamon sinners. Did you know that ants hate cinnamon? Seriously, try it out sometime. Easy mistake to make, I'm sure. Using the money he received out of the loan from Salieri, Colonel Sanders purchased an old abandoned warehouse in Kentucky. Colonel Sanders was right. His recipes were an instant hit with the locals, and this made him a great deal of dough, and I don't mean pizza dough. Using said dough, Sanders was able to buy off the loan to Salieri. However, that's when things started to get more than a little, dicey, shall we say. I don't mean diced Roma tomatoes. When it became clear that Colonel Sanders was making some serious money out of his restaurant business, Salieri manipulated Sanders so that he'd be able to become a major shareholder in the company. In truth, Salieri was the one who helped Sanders with founding the KFC company, even being the one to give the company its iconic name. So the next time you're eating from your bonus bucket, you better be thinking of old Ennio Salieri. Also, Salieri was very nasty as he started attaching diamonds onto the chicken legs in order to help earn him a killing on the black market or in a deal with the Jewish mob. Wink. One time, Colonel Sanders discovered the diamonds attached to an old moldy chicken leg and quickly deduced that Salieri had attached diamonds to all of the chicken legs. Needing more proof, Sanders asked if Salieri wished for him to unload the chicken legs into the containment room. Salieri suddenly became very cagey as he said, "No, why the hell should you do it?" He then laughed a mighty. Colonel Sanders laughed with him too back then, but he knew he wanted to get out from Salieri's influence. But Salieri had a lot of influence. You see, Salieri preys on people's fears of losing what they have, so they become obedient to the protection he promises them. As the 1930s went by, Colonel Sanders began making the first steps of turning his small-town restaurant into a multi-million-dollar empire. Start off slowly. Opened a few KFC stores across Kentucky, and initially he was perfectly content with having his business just based in Kentucky. This was until Colonel Sanders' mentor from Buckinghamshire, David the Duke Dickinson, suggested that Sanders make his company worldwide. "Sounds a little too simple," Colonel Sanders remarked, to which David Dickinson responded with, "Oh, what a bobby jag you are." Dickinson then began rubbing his chin all over Sanders' hand for an uncomfortable amount of time. Colonel Sanders knew that it'd be unwise to question the man with the tan on such affairs as this, and so with some initial reluctance he started making moves towards turning his company worldwide. David the Duke Dickinson was a very stubborn man, as he wanted Colonel Sanders to provide him with complete information regarding the recipes. In stark contrast to Dickinson, Colonel Sanders was a very intelligent little Easter egg, and he threatened to expose Dickinson for his controversial theater show. Pleasure for Treasure. Pleasure for Treasure was a theater show that was produced by David Dickinson during the late 1920s. Though the show was very successful, with one show being attended by President Calvin, it only ran for one season. The aim of the show was to reunite families and couples with items they had parted with many moons ago. However, it all went wrong in the finale for Series 1. Alfie and Wendy, a couple from Salford, were reunited with their long-lost gramophone. Alfie had given the gramophone to Frank Buller. Alfie and Frank Buller had co-starred in a play called Fair Play in 1915 or thereabouts. Alfie needed money at the time to buy an iron lung. He believed that iron lungs were the way of the future and that by having one you would be able to live forever. Little did Alfie know how wrong he was. During the show, Frank made a rookie error by saying that due to the recession and the fact that gramophones were incredibly rare now, Alfie's one was now worth over $7 million. Previously only been given $2 million by Buller. Furious beyond belief, Alfie grabbed the gramophone from Buller and ran down the streets with it. This ended up costing him his own life, as he was ran over by an old horse who knows all about Grand Central Station. But Will's master, who's a corrupt cop, let him go there with his zebra homies? I think not. Bloody hell, Dickinson remarked. David Dickinson never liked that damn Frank Buller, despite only knowing him for like 20 minutes. Less than that, really. This was made all the more clear with the utter disdain that was present on Dickinson's face when he was first introduced to Buller. Frank Buller was a very rude man. He insulted Dickinson by slapping him on the back 37 times. He also laughed his ass off when he saw Dickinson fall down the stairs outside the courthouse in Benning. Certainly quite the bastard, that Frank Buller. Couldn't do anything about that since Buller's brother Francis owned the company which produced Pleasure for Treasure. After Dickinson made a harsh remark about Buller's teeth looking like rat teeth, Pleasure for Treasure was cancelled. Dickinson was forbidden to make any comments to the press, and as such the reason behind the cancellation of Pleasure for Treasure became a mystery, for who would be stupid enough to cancel Pleasure for Treasure? Could it be you? Sorry about that massive tangent, but I just really wanted to discuss Pleasure for Treasure. Colonel Sanders knew all about Dickinson, suck up to Francis like a little biatch and threatened to expose him to the Pope. Fearing for his safety, Dickinson packed up his bags and caught the first plane back to Great Britain. Also, the plane had a massive picture of David Dickinson on it because the company were big fans of Pleasure for Treasure. When World War II broke out, Colonel Sanders was summoned to fight. Not wanting to fight, Colonel Sanders came up with a cunning plan and presented it to Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who puffed on a huge cigar, or as the British calls them, fags. That means cigar. As he said, "Well, go on then, show us what you got, kid." The cunning plan was to host a KFC-themed play with lots of training montages and pointless musical numbers, which were sweeter than Sweet Johnson's Sweet Tooth. The play was entitled Made in Kentucky. It followed the story of Colonel Sanders playing an American soldier named Lance Chance who wishes to marry the daughter of a wealthy Kentucky businessman and state senator. To win the senator's approval, Lance has to create the best Kentucky Fried Chicken the world has ever seen. Only then will he ever be able to get into the senator's good books. There's also a totally pointless side plot in the play involving some shrimp who want to murder some penguins, including one named Pepperoni, who was quite the ladies' man on set, according to my contact over at Whitcomb and Pump. There also some other side plot, which involves some dogs that wanted to win the war by putting poison in the Germans' chocolate bars. Did you know that chocolate is bad for dogs? It was a very complicated script with lots of typos due to Colonel Sanders' manager only being 11% English. That explains a lot. Regardless of that fact, the play was a huge success, and Colonel Sanders performed the play a record-breaking 576 times. Churchill was so impressed that he put in arrangements with some of his boys to stop Sanders from having to fight in the war. Well, golly gee willikers, isn't that swell? Made in Kentucky, though incredibly successful, it made very little profit. As part of the deal he made with Winston Churchill, Colonel Sanders was forced to pay all the money made from the play to charities. What a Bobby Jaguar. Needing to make some money and fast, Colonel Sanders decided to start adding a weird array of items to his menu. Yeah, wonder if he was influenced by that Taco Bell beefer. Thankfully, Sanders was much more careful with where he got his merchandise from, which meant that we never had an incident like the Great Lamb Hot Pot fiasco again. However, much like Burger King, KFC was known for its extremely weird menu items during the 40s and 50s, including Beefy Bap, Kentucky-style Dodo, which was really just the regular KFC chicken colored red, and Kale Street. Kale Street is this really bitter, thin piece of flat bread which has like a stack of kale on it. It was so much fucking kale that it literally went up to the ceiling. Good luck getting that home with you, huh? You were not permitted to take it home in a doggy bag, as Colonel Sanders was worried that people might be spies and leak his recipes to the public. Kentucky-style Dodo was just the regular Kentucky chicken, just painted red via red spray paint. There was also 1% more salt added to the Kentucky-style Dodo, which is what makes people think it's a completely different dish. Just don't tell Colonel Dodo, will ya? Now, as for the Beefy Bap, well, let's just see, shall we? The Beefy Bap is this really disgusting thing that was first produced in 1946 by Colonel Sanders in an attempt to attract beef lovers to KFC. It's honestly the worst thing on menu. This is because the beef was really bad. It wasn't rotten or anything like that, but it was just not right. It was, however, extremely slimy, and it would roll down kitchen tables, creating a huge fucking mess in the process. It also didn't help that every time you bit into the damn thing, you'd end up getting beefy beef juice everywhere. The beefy bat becomes even more disgusting when you learn the tragic origin behind it. Colonel Sanders, having ran out of beef after just one table serving of beefy baps, decided to ask a local farmer for some of his livestock. Most farmers turned down the offer, however, and one such farmer named Thomas Downs offered to give Colonel Sanders his entire cow livestock in exchange for $600. Downs used the money from Sanders to buy his own yacht, as the pricing on yachts at that time was at an all-time low. Downs, though he appeared to be a very meek and frail man, he was actually incredibly cunning and a con artist, as he often scoured the streets of Walnut Pass pretending to be a charity collector. Downs used the money that locals gave him in the form of donations in order to buy some Grinch merch, as he sure did have a thing for the Grinch. I'm not really sure how Thomas Downs knew that the Grinch was given the fact that this all took place in 1946, but whatever, just roll with it. Roll with the crock. That's bloody dangerous, that is, sonny boy. Mr. Downs had no intention of paying the debt back to Colonel Sanders. He was planning on using his newly bought yacht to sail around the world. Sadly, however, it was just not meant to be. Once Sanders caught wind of this development, he headed to Downs' ranch and started beating the ever-loving snots out of the farmer. During the beatdown, Thomas Downs coughed out eggshells, which came into contact with Sanders' eye. "Are you a bastard?" Sanders bellowed as he proceeded to throw Downs across the field and laughed a wicked onion cat laugh as the smelly farmer flew all the way up to Hushabye Mountain. With Downs disposed of, Colonel Sanders evicted his entire family and took control of the ranch. Once in control of the ranch, Sanders started breeding his own livestock, including cows, bulls, pigs, geese, chicken, and fish, too. Wink. As it turns out, Downs was not the one to worry about it, as it was his grass that had the real problem. Allow me to explain. Basically, Downs, wanting his animals to become the biggest animals in the whole damn world, started lacing his grass with crack, I think, or some kind of drug. This caused the animals to become super fat and lazy. This was the reason why Sanders had so much meat to use whenever Downs supplied him with a cow. The use of drug-laced grass would come to haunt Colonel Sanders in the years to come, in more ways than one. So sad. Actually, no, nothing ever came from it due to a problem with the files. Some shit. Let's make up the files. In the 1960s and 70s, KFC started sucking, as Colonel Sanders started taking a back seat in running the company. Decisions he made were no longer getting taken seriously by the company, and he'd left management in the care of his old friend Marcel Toing. Marcel Toing was a really stupid rat who used to work as a lieutenant for the Morello crime family back in New Bordeaux. During his time in Bordeaux, Toing would eat his own marshmallows because mice are fucking monsters. That really impressed Slimer, who was in bed with the Marcanos, you could say, during that time. Anyways, Marcel moved to Empire Bay in 1964, and by then Empire Bay had become the central headquarters for the KFC company as opposed to Kentucky. Marcel Toing was very cheap and cut corners on everything. The biggest problem that Colonel Sanders had with Marcel's new direction was the gravy. The gravy sucked. Like, it legit tasted like ass. "That damn gravy tastes like a darn swamp rat," Colonel Sanders had told an interviewer in 1971. The gravy tasted so bad that Marcel and his enforcer Greg, who wears a Mickey Mouse cap from Disneyland at all times, stole it from the sewer. During the 1960s and 70s, gravy factories were pretty darn infamous for pouring their gone-off gravy into the sewers, thinking no one would notice. But they did. Oh, they did. Using the gone-off gravy, Marcel was able to earn a killing and bought himself his own super mansion, which has a room for a view and a swimming pool inside a rubber dinghy inside a bowl of Jell-O. There's a grape in the center. In fact, Colonel Sanders was so angered by the direction that Marcel Toing was taking his company that he refused to be featured in the company's advertising. Under Marcel's tenure, the menu became very boring and lackluster, and it lost any real flair that it once had. Marcel also started increasing the pricing of everything on the menu. Because this was at a time when KFC stocks were at an all-time low, it meant that sometimes old Marcel Toing and his staff would have to improvise. One time Marcel supplied a cheeseburger to a kid named Junior. However, the cheese was actually plastic. This disgusted his parents, who tried their best to get their son to stop eating it. However, Junior simply responded with, "It just so happens that I'm quite impartial to plastic." What is wrong with that fucking rat? However, Marcel Toing was certainly not a stupid rat, as he had decided to boycott all of the weird items that Sanders had added to the menu during the 40s and 50s. Appointing Greg as his enforcer, Marcel was able to scare the entire Empire Bay Police Department, EBPD, onto his payroll. Marcel practically controlled the cops. Knowing this, Colonel Sanders attempted to get rid of Marcel by sending a rather ugly cat after him. However, Marcel was very cunning, and he pulled out a strawberry from his ass, which he then fed to the cat. The cat then became solely loyal to Marcel and Greg, as it also became a frequent diner at KFC. Marcel knew that Colonel Sanders was behind the attempted assassination, but refused to do anything about it due to his love of crime novels. "He certainly is a character, that Colonel Sanders," Toing remarked while stirring some gravy into a stirring pot. In 1980, something terrible happened which ended up rocking the entire nation. The great Colonel Sanders had died. The death was expected given the fact that Sanders had not been well for a very long time, but it still came as a shock to Marcel and the rest of his staff. After the funeral, Marcel had a meeting at KFC's official headquarters in Sand Island, where he discussed closing the company for good. "I just see no point in keeping the company running with the Colonel dead. I mean, with Sandy gone, who else is going to be our mascot?" Marcel inquired, to which Greg simply responded with, "Precisely!" That's when one of Marcel's staff members offered a solution. He then proceeded to have Marcel and Greg knocked out by some tear gas, which he'd managed to leak through the air vents. "I really need to fix that damn AC," Marcel said tiredly, as Greg responded once again with, "Precisely!" After this, the pair both fell into a deep slumber. When they awoke, Greg and Marcel found themselves inside a large recording studio, which had been decorated to look like a big old block of cheese. At that moment, an announcer could be heard sing over the intercom, The TV is on. The TV is on." Suddenly, Rap Rat appeared from a small hatch which had been placed inside the recording studio. "Rap Rat?" Marcel asked, confused. "I'm history in the making. I'm the talk of the town," Rap Rat explained as he climbed through the hatch along with several incredibly awkward-looking BBC extras. They all began dancing to an incredibly cringy rap, which was so fricking bad, like, seriously, I won't bother assaulting your eyelids or eardrums by relaying it to you. Though Marcel and Greg appeared to have enjoyed Rap Rat's little musical number, they'd honestly fight to give it a star on Yelp. "What's going on here, Rap Rat?" Greg inquired, as Rap Rat responded with, "I got me a little sensation. So let's get cheesy." It's also worth noting that while saying that, Rap Rat got extra close to Greg's face. Rap Rat X Greg. Now that's the love story I want to see. Get on that, Mr. Tomasino. Sorry about that. In any case, Rap Rat gave Marcel and Greg a chicken that had no bones. No, that was a joke, son. What actually happened is that Rap Rat brought Marcel and Greg out of the recording studio and into the old rundown ruins of Cortex Power, which was where the dreaded rat had made the base of his operations. Once inside the lab, Rap Rat made a large black cauldron appear magically. He turned to face Marcel and said, "Say cheese!" "Cheese!" Marcel said awkwardly, as Rap Rat began sticking his huge scissor-like ears into the cauldron. Eventually, the cauldron started shooting out some disgusting, smelly green flames which stank so bad. It smelled like that time the smelly beaver did the chili Charlie Cha-Cha in front of a cynical Canadian news station who have ties to the Colombians. Heard they got a shipment coming in on Friday. Cue the sinister music. Wiki, 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 wild, wild west. Using his monster rap feet, Rap Rat kicked the cauldron onto the wooden floor of the lab as something, or rather someone, began to climb out of it. Thinking quickly, Greg reached inside his Mickey Mouse hat and pulled out a shotgun, which got knocked out of his hands by Rap Rat, who screamed, "Wait your turn!" "He's Rap Rat and he's the sauce," a man could be heard saying in the background in an overly serious tone. Marcel was tempted to make a break for the fire exit when the creature that Rap Rat had created finally made itself known to him and Greg. It was Colonel Sanders. Or rather, it was a series of Colonel Sanders clones. Marcel Twing rubbed his chin for a good half hour. He then realized that the true reason KFC was falling in popularity in recent years was not because of the OG Colonel Sanders dying. No, it was really because the company had no mascot, no advertising campaign to speak of. KFC needed a gimmick that would enable them to stand a chance against their rivals, most especially McDonald's and Burger King. Rap Rat then went on to explain that Colonel Sanders' local washing machine dealer was responsible for his creation. The dealer worked for a couple of cowboys for a brief time during the 1980s, around the time that Rap Rat was created. During the creation of the Rap Rat puppet, the dealer ended up coughing out washing up liquid into the puppet's stuffing, which is what allowed for Rap Rat to become the sentient and insane stone-cold killer we all know today. Looking to repay Sanders, Rap Rat broke into the mortuary and stole Sanders' body. Taking Sanders' body back to Cortex Power, Rap Rat cut off one of Sanders' fingers. Talk about chicken fingers. And then had him delivered back to the morgue. Placing the finger into the black cauldron, Rap Rat was able to combine it with a series of tubes, which somehow meant that he was able to create the Colonel Sanders clone army. Well, it wasn't really much of an army, but it was still an army nevertheless. Rap Rat didn't demand payment for his services, but he did request for Marcel to wet his beak every once in a while, and Marcel Twing was more than happy to oblige. Despite Colonel Sanders' will clearly stating his face was not to be used in any of the company's advertising, Marcel and Greg continued to plaster Sanders' face on every KFC store in the world. By this time, KFC had become a multi-million-dollar empire. There were several KFC restaurants located all around the place. Marcel and Greg became media sensations and very rich and powerful mice. In 1981, Marcel bought a casino in Kentucky, and 2 years later he opened up another casino. Marcel's goal was to turn Kentucky into Las Vegas Part 2, that means 2. By the time the 2000s had rolled around, the Colonel Sanders clones had appeared in over 9,001 adverts. However, this was, of course, problems when it came to using these clones. For example, during the filming of one such advert, the stage lights on set were so damn hot that it caused the Colonel Sanders clone's skin to melt off like a slice of delicious cheesy pizza. They're extremely reckless clones as they'd walk straight into oncoming traffic, and Marcel made his way through the entire clone army in a span of just 2 years. That's 8 seasons to you foreigners. Marcel tried making adverts without the clones. However, this created a big controversy when the people in the adverts ate with their mouths open as they were being force-fed by Freddy Krueger. Bon appetit! Freddy proclaimed as he stuffed some chicken salad into the mouths of BBC extras. So sad. Controversies aside, this is when Marcel met the most important Colonel Sanders clone to have ever been conceived. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. The extra crispy kernel. The extra crispy kernel was the very last Colonel Sanders clone to exist, as all the others had been wiped out. Although he appeared to just be Colonel Sanders with an extreme suntan, there was just something about the extra crispy kernel that Marcel Twing opted to make him the new star of KFC's advertising campaign. The extra crispy kernel added a lot to his own character, even creating his own catchphrase, which was, "I'm the extra crispy kernel." Wow, how original. The extra crispy kernel and the adverts featuring him very quickly became the subject of controversy. One time an ad featuring extra crispy was accidentally shown on a local news station. Could have been shown at a worse time considering a man was being interviewed at the exact moment about his thoughts on Donald Trump's Xbox collection or some shit. The news station intended to showcase a video of Donald Trump showing off his Xbox games, but instead the entire station was true to a video which had extra crispy kernel sitting on a sun lounger. He looked at the camera with an incredibly smug expression before introducing himself with, "I'm the extra crispy kernel, and my extra crispy $5 fillets now only 99 cents. Even you can afford that, for God's sakes, you smelly poor hippie." The news station managed to cut the ad off, but the man being interviewed nearly let out a laugh, but he had to hold it in, as the news station was known for sending hitmen after people who dared smile on their show. Sick bastards. No one wants to go on that news show. I wonder why. The extra crispy kernel was not without his own defects, as in one such advert he was shown shoving a bargain bucket into his ear. Another advert he was shown feeding people had buried him in the sandy sand of Sand City. The easily offended Knights of Nottingham were very offended by the extra crispy kernel, because of course they fucking were. I mean, it's kind of in their job description to get offended by things. Marcel and Greg were eventually taken to the court with the Knights. During the court case, the Knights broke out into a large musical number, which was led by Lady Berkshire. "We want the rappers, set the rappers free. Crispy is guilty, crucify him." I should also mention that during the song, the conductor pulled an incredibly, that's a mix of both words, smelly face, which made it look as though he had shat in his pants, or in the very least let out a massive fart. Greasy fried chicken fart. I just hope nobody noticed. I think Lady Berkshire noticed as she started smiling an incredibly smug grin. What a weirdo. Too smug for my liking, anyway. The song inspired Marcel and Greg to kill the extra crispy kernel. The pair tracked Crispy down to an old abandoned oil yard where he was attempting to dig up some Kellogg's golden nuggets. Greg leapt on top of Crispy and started beating the snot out of him. Very near death, Crispy coughed out 2 chicken wings into Marcel's face as he asked rhetorically, "What now, Ratty? What now?" "Have it your way, you prick," Marcel said, evilly quoting Burger King, as he and Greg set to work on killing Crispy. They crucified Crispy on a cross in the town square and proceeded to light the cross on fire. The death of the extra crispy kernel sent shockwaves throughout the nation. Commissioner Al Priss was asked about who he thought committed the murder by overly British news reporter 1107. "This is gosh dude rats, Marcel Twing and Greg something or other. They need to be rounded up and shot." Al Priss yelled at the very top of his lungs, but his lung capacity wasn't very high. However, Al Priss was a notoriously corrupt cop and was only saying that so that the press wouldn't catch on to the fact that he was actually on Marcel Twing's payroll, and for big money, too. Al Priss was a regular patron at KFC, and thanks to his senior status in the police department, he was able to earn large cash bribes and freebies from Marcel, just as long as he kept his mouth shut about the recipes. Now even Al Priss posed no threat against the KFC company. Another Kentucky Fried Chicken-themed restaurant in the area posed the real threat. The rival restaurant was named, "Well, you're hardly going to eat here anyway, so maybe eat at Joe's." Actually, don't do that, because that would be going against our moral code, kind of like the time you ate pineapples in front of Dorchester Hound. Remember that we do. Oh, that might just be the shortest name for a restaurant that I've ever seen in my life. Sarcasm. The rival restaurant conspired with the easily offended Knights of Nottingham to close KFC down. The rival restaurant's owners all went out to their local KFC and decided to scare all the patrons of the restaurant into thinking they had a rat problem, and Marcel didn't want to do anything about it. To do this, the rival restaurant rats started having a large drugged-out frenzy or some kind of orgy in the middle of the restaurant. It was truly a sight to see. They kept making weird moaning noises, which was enough to evict the entire restaurant in 5 seconds flat. It's much easier than the Rival Rat's original plan, which was to simply ask Marcel Twing and his staff for the recipes. This was much easier. Much easier, indeed. The presence of rats in the restaurant completely destroyed KFC's reputation for a few years, and as a result, Marcel and Greg fled the country after giving a tip-off to Al Priss, which allowed for him to arrest the rival rats. He sent the rival rats to the laboratory, not a laboratory, where they were experimented on for the rest of their days. Isn't that wacky? In any case, Marcel and Greg fled to Rio de Janeiro, where they opened up another restaurant entitled Ratatouille. You may have heard of it. And this restaurant was even more successful than KFC could have ever hoped to being. Sadly, Marcel had now lost any moral code as he had begun stealing food from the kitchen of the human restaurant located next door. This sounds awfully familiar. Marcel and Greg completely took control of Rio's food market, and they were planning to next take over the world. Will the bad guys let them do it? I don't know. Probably. Also, Marcel and Greg, before they left KFC in the hands of their part-time lover, Mr. Broccoli, tried a last-ditch effort to make KFC great again by adding a KFC-flavored sunscreen. The way the sunscreen worked is that it would make your skin as dark and as crispy as the extra crispy kernel. Sadly, Marcel and Greg failed to test the bloody thing, as it ended up causing people's skins to melt off. We were never able to deduce quite what made the sunscreen so deadly, but it did contain at least 7 doses of heroin, which had been supplied by Marcel by Winston Chu, a Red Bull in the Sun On Yi triad to Marcel. You know what happens to rats, Marcel? Winston had asked Marcel one day as they had lunch at Winston's mother's restaurant. Ah, Marcel said awkwardly, as Winston proclaimed, "They have a pillow fight!" And so Marcel and Winston engaged in a violent pillow fight. 2 members of Winston's gang were killed in the pillow fight, and loads of customers were injured. Some story. Some chew. Anyway, with Marcel Twing and Greg departing, the company was taken over by vegetable philanthropist Master Broccoli. Mr. Broccoli had always been a piece of broccoli, and he claims his mother was a roast potato and that his father, Saint Foot, was also a broccoli. Mr. Brocchioli was an old friend of the easily offended knights. And on their persuasions, he started adding a series of more healthy items to the menu, including a salad. However, problems began arising because Mr. Brocchioli would lose his shit whenever he saw people eating salads. Loss was cool because he claimed the lettuce leaves were his children. Mr. Brocchioli also loved protests against the British government, and who doesn't? And often held big protests in the middle of a mafia-controlled deli. The mafia tipped off the cops, and Mr. Brocchioli was given life behind bars. They would have done that, however, he was able to escape prison by letting the prison warden Terrence Stone take a bite out of his delicious broccoli head. It's worth noting in the sense of Mr. Brocchioli, though he despised other people doing it, he was known for eating broccoli by the packet as he was secretly a cannibal. That fucker. Fucking asshole. You required low-ranking street enforcers to steal packets of broccoli from Tesco and Asda for him. After leaving prison, Mr. Brocchioli returned to running KFC. Now Mr. Broccoli again converted all the KFCs in the world into BFC, which stands for Broccoli Fried Chicken. How appetizing. Mr. Broccoli and his wife, who has no toenails, turned KFC into a healthy hangout for their vegetable friends. If you wanted to buy some food from there, you were forced to run on a treadmill and then carry your food along a path of boiling hot coal. Can you handle that? Well, that's good, because neither can I. Mr. Broccoli was known for being a very cynical piece of broccoli, but you didn't know that broccoli could be cynical, did you? Well, it can. Mr. Broccoli often insulted Larry the Lobster for his love of protein shakes. Larry lost his shit and tried to attack Broccoli, responded by punching Larry right in the gut. Larry gagged in pain, but recovered quickly and thought nothing of it, even thanking Broccoli for giving him such a good fisting. Wink. Sadly, the owner of the local gym refused to allow Larry to continue adding the gym. The owner did not want people thinking that the people at his gym could get beaten up by pieces of broccoli. Imagine that. He was just a little too respectful. However, this move ended up biting that gym owner in the ass as Larry went on to found his own gym, ably named Larry's Gym, which is based in Bikini Bottom. Mr. Broccoli, meanwhile, was delighted when he heard that Larry had skipped town. He went back to running his business like normal until it all went pear-shaped. On May 25th, 2018, KFC was raided by the NYPD after they received a tip-off from a mouse with a severe nose injury. The NYPD headed into the restaurant's back room and discovered what appeared to be an opium den. I knew there was a reason I was addicted to that bonus bucket. What? Oh, well, moving on. Yes, Mr. Broccoli, despite warning his employees against it, was actually dealing in opium. This was also supplied to him by Winston Chu. Broccoli helped Winston with gaining a steady market in New York City's drug trade, and as thanks, Winston would provide security for any KFC store in the world. Despite raiding the KFC, the NYPD were unable to find Mr. Broccoli due to him faking his own death and leaving a mushed-up piece of broccoli on the kitchen counter. That same day, the NYPD put out an official police statement that Mr. Broccoli boiled himself to death. In reality, Mr. Broccoli moved to Great Britain. The NYPD decided to not pursue Broccoli despite receiving tip-offs about his survival. I keep an active file which held all the answers to Mr. Broccoli. However, the file ended up getting stolen by a pigeon, who may or may not be in the bed with the Molinari's. How will we know? That's a rhetorical don't answer. After Mr. Broccoli vanished, Daddy Derek took control of KFC, and he was no better than Broccoli. It's very weird as he kept pestering people to come into his restaurant or to eat his healthy produce. Daddy Derek also provided some entertainment for the patrons by practicing with nunchakus in the backyard of every KFC restaurant. Oh, Michelangelo. Every KFC had an Elm Street, and every KFC has a backyard. Daddy Derek also had a son named Cool Cat, who was a giant humanoid cat thing which sings and dances, much to the chagrin of all of Derek's customers. Cool Cat was usually very docile, but when he got mad, he'd let you know about it. One time, Eric Estrada was eating from the held-back reserves of Daddy Derek's kitchen unit. Upon catching Estrada doing that, Cool Cat cried, "Oh no, what should I do?" He then decided to have a right go at Eric and yelled at him for a good half hour. "Daddy is," Eric proclaimed while pointing at Cool Cat. He did this because Daddy Derek had gotten him hammered on spoiled milk at a barbecue a few hours prior. This was actually just a test that Daddy Derek had created in order to see if Cool Cats really had the skills to pay the bills. Daddy Derek, having grown up in California for his entire time, had a lot of connections, actors, and celebrities down that way. He hired well-known actors who were really just dodgy BBC extras. He also attempted to get Will Smith to appear at his restaurant at the time that the live-action Aladdin hit theaters. However, he was unable to get into contact with Smith, but he managed to reach Smith's agent, who simply told Derek that they were very happy. And that's just beautiful. Wiki wiki wow wow west. It's also worth noting, before we cap off, that Derek is a massive stoner, and he smokes so much fucking weed that it sometimes fills up the entire fucking restaurant with noxious gas, which is also fucking bad. You can smell from as far fucking north as Frisco. North by North Frisco, am I right? Daddy Derek is very stressed when it comes to running his company, so every Tuesday night he runs out into the desert to fire some machine guns. Now, in all fairness, Derek was not completely heartless, as he tried his best to make some vast improvements to KFC Company by attempting to add some entertainment to the company, including a really shitty ventriloquist whose parrot puppet contains the soul of Albert Einstein. Magician emerges a parakeet by stuffing into a top hat, and a cruise ship comedian who attempts to entertain Derek's customers by proclaiming, "Hey, sailor!" The cruise ship then proceeded to burst into a groovy dance number. And what makes matters worse is the fact that Daddy Derek would join in with the dancing. That's just sick. These days, people have come to know KFC as the home of Daddy Derek and Cool Cat. You know, I'm sure you knew that. The only time that Daddy Derek ever really got a very famous celebrity to perform at KFC was when he hired famous race car driver Guy Gagne. Sadly, Gagne was no longer held in very high regard by the public after he lost the race to a snail. "I lost to a snail!" Guy Gagne ranted as he downed a bottle of scotch while Daddy Derek danced with Cool Cat on the stage, which they'd built on the very top floor of KFC. Guy Gagne joined in with the dancing by hopping on the tables and dancing to Queen. Hard to imagine, isn't it? Should have danced to Wake Me Up Before You Go-Go, or maybe it could have at least done the Funky Chicken, given, KFC and all that. Now, believe it or not, there is a reason I wanted to talk to you about KFC. I lied at the beginning of this masterpiece when I said that Jonathan McGuire had gotten ass flu. What really happened is that I threw a goose into McGuire's basement. Mr. McGuire's very scared of geese, and the goose ended up chasing him around his entire basement, which gave me, Bucky O'Buck Neal, the opportunity to steal his nose on KFC. KFC deserves to be talked about. While it certainly didn't have quite as bad of a downfall as Burger King and Jack in the Box, there's still something there you should think about the next time you head to your local KFC. KFC killed my grandma's shoe shiner after he ate a beefy bap. KFC covered up the death very quickly by giving my grandma a 600,000-year-old gemstone, but nothing will ever absolve them of their sins. So if you excuse me, it's time for din-dins. I think I'm going to go help myself to a bonus bucket, or maybe, just maybe, a nice little corn on the cob. Oh yeah, babe. Wouldn't that be something? It's finger fucking good.